Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here to see so many happy, smiling faces. My talk today is not such a happy talk, I suppose. You can see from my title there, I'm suggesting or questioning whether my computer actually hates me. Just briefly about me, there's a little bit of an introduction there, but I do work at the Faraday Institute for Science and Religion. This is an interdisciplinary research institute based at the University of Cambridge, where our overall research project is on the science of human flourishing. There are 6 sub-projects involved in that. I'm just simply working on one of them, and this is the point at which I take a really deep breath because I did not write the title for my project. 2 people did who don't ever give presentations. It is considering human identity in an age of nearly human machines, the impact of advances in robotics and AI technology on human identity and self-understanding. Thank you very much, John and Peter, for never ever reading that out loud. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about my research and that is so much worse. Oh, that is just the worst. Oh dear, we're in serious trouble now. I don't know if you recognise this. This is Hal from Space Odyssey 2001. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a joke. Not a very good one. I don't do very good jokes. But generally, when I give presentations, and I've probably done somewhere in the region of 50 or so academic presentations. This is my least academic one, and I love it. This tends to happen. Something breaks down, something doesn't work, there's already been a potential problem with something else later in my slides. And my first response is actually to blame the computer involved. I tend to think they don't like me, they don't work particularly well for me. Now before all you very smart technologists here start asking me whether I'm actually using my tech properly and perhaps I should just, pay more attention to what I'm doing, I think something very interesting is happening when I start talking about my computer hating me. This doesn't happen to me, but in my head, this is not far off what's going on. I personify my technology. I anthropomorphize it. That's a nice long word for making it seem more human than it actually is. But let's question that instinct. Where does it come from? Well, this, like I say, doesn't literally happen. There's no bipedal robot beneath my computer. But I do tend to image it in a way that's quite person-like or human-like. So where does this idea of human-like come from? Well, I hate this picture, I really do, but it's quite a good example of a human-like piece of technology. I think in this instance the robot is about as human as the woman, and she's not particularly human looking, she's quite synthetic. But I think there's something about the way in which we look at technology and the way in which it works and moves that makes us more or less likely to consider it in person-like ways. So here's some more examples of robots. Are these more or less person-like? I'm not going to take a census on this. I think perhaps the way in which they're being used, the way in which they can be used, how they can work, will define whether we consider them more or less person-like. So in the bottom left, you've got a robot possibly, hypothetically, marrying a lady there. That's a very human-like activity. 2 robots getting married there as well. Whereas top left, I find that a bit disturbing actually, I don't know about you. We'll talk about disturbances later, but that robot doesn't really have arms or legs, so therefore it's a bit disjointed from what we consider to be human. So perhaps there's something about the way in which humans, robotic technological objects operate in ways that we consider to be human. So like this robot here doesn't have legs, and I don't know if you can read that, he's begging, it seems, will prostata for energy. So it's doing something that most of us would feel sympathy for. He's begging for change. He's doing something that's very human. I'm going to try and get this next video to work. Like I said, sometimes technology just does genuinely not work for me. Come on. Come on. No. Okay. I can guess it from the... Where was it again? I don't use Macs. Sorry. So I'm going to give you another example of how we react to technology, if this video will play. Here we go. Honestly. Got Mercury retrograde in my star sign somewhere. Right. Where were we? Yes. So, of course, this is a parody. It's an imitation of a charity video based primarily on footage that came out from the Boston Dynamics lab, exploring what their prototypes could do, lots of pushing and shoving, taking objects out of the way of robots. Now, this format evokes our empathy, even though it's a parody, and taking away the parodic elements. Lots of people I saw online after the release of the Boston Dynamics footage were either quite sympathetic and saying, no, these robots are being bullied and that they are being hurt, they're feeling bad emotions because of that hurt. Or some people are generally kind of concerned that this is the footage that our robot overlords are going to show us when they do finally come and torture us for all eternity. I will say more about that in a minute. But what about technology like my laptop, like this laptop, which I don't understand, that does not really have a humanoid shape? I've got an example of this as well. AlphaGo, who's familiar with AlphaGo? Yeah. Basically, machine learning working at its most optimum level, able to defeat one of the current champions at the game Go. It doesn't have much of a physical presence. I've checked, and these are the actual literal servers for AlphaGo. I checked with someone else. It's in practice, when it was playing against Lisa Dole, it had to have a human sit there and do its moves for it. It didn't even have a crude sort of robotic arm to make the moves it was predicting. However, that's not how people perceive AlphaGo. Here's a few examples from fandoms who have illustrated AlphaGo, primarily female. There are some male forms, there's some young male sort of school-type boy versions there. Very anime style, generally Asian as well, because it was playing a game that's normally associated with the Far East. Again, the assumption was that an Asian model would make sense. But this formation of the non-embodied into a person has variations. So there's another type here, AlphaGo, as slightly more abstracted. The head is based around the logo for AlphaGo, if you're familiar with it. And when it gets excited, you can see here, it gets win, 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 and the logo head is spinning around faster. And that's meant to be Lisa Dole suffering some sort of sweaty stress from the fact that he's losing. And actually, in fact, Lisa Dole did leave the room for 10 minutes while playing against AlphaGo when it played a move that was so beyond his conception of how to play Go, what they could consider to be a divine move. It has now retrospectively been described as a divine move, that this was actually quite a traumatic moment for him, and people say that's the point at which the game switched and he started losing. So here's some examples, I say, of anthropomorphism of the disembodied technology. There's nothing in AlphaGo that suggests it should look like this or like a young Asian girl. I was talking specifically about how my computer hates me, and negative versions of anthropomorphism obviously exist. I'm going to show you a series of slides now, a bit of interactivity. I want you to put your hands up when you recognise a pattern in these slides. There's about 9 of them or so. So if you pay attention. Hands going up, yeah, hands to the back. Another one. Yes, okay. So, I've spoken to journalists, and one journalist in particular, about blinking Terminator pictures. Every time there's a discussion about the future impact potential of artificial intelligence, if it takes a slightly negative stance, there will be a negative anthropomorphism by employing science fiction tropes, specifically Terminator. Yes, there are other ones. Ex Machina comes up a lot. I don't like that film. I can talk about that later. But as an example of how science fiction and the anthropomorphic understanding of what the technology will want, Terminator is probably one of the key ones. Obviously, this is an apocalyptic version of my computer hates me. My computer wants me to be farmed or killed or blown up by nuclear weapons. Wonderful, something to really look forward to there. However, academics studying, well, some academics, not myself in particular, some academics studying the potential futures of AI and robotics are very dismissive about science fiction. So, for example, What to Think About Machines That Think, a book edited by John Brockman, he says in his preface, this year's contributors, and there's about 120 or so very short articles in this book, are a grown-up bunch and have eschewed all mention of that science fiction and all those movies. There's a typo there, wonderful. So this idea that we should put science fiction and its narratives to one side, well, I argue the opposite. We should be very aware of the context that develops our ideas about science and technology, and in particular artificial intelligence, I think, is probably one of the most influenced by science fiction. For example, who here is familiar with the concept of the singularity? Yes, good, an audience that knows. But briefly, and this is a very wonderful illustration of it, the singularity is the idea at some point in the development of artificial intelligence, its ability to rewrite its own code will lead to an intelligence explosion where it briefly reaches human equivalent level before proceeding off into a stratospheric superintelligence that we can't even really conceive of. So you can see the little stick men there who are dealing with a dumb human equivalent AI before it reaches Einstein levels and then shoots off. Now this is a comedy version of the superintelligence argument, but it actually goes back to the 1960s when Moore's law was first developed, the suggestion that the exponential growth in the processing power of technology would continue to grow and grow to a point at which we reach this intelligence explosion, or the version given by Good in his speculations concerning the first ultra-intelligent machine, where last sentence is probably the key one. He says, thus the first ultra-intelligent machine is the last invention that man need ever make. The idea being that the superintelligence, the singularity, would be able to proceed to solve all our problems, create all the answers. Now, it can also be described not only as a moment of achieving superintelligence, but as superintelligence in itself, and this is where we get to some fun interpretations or folk interpretations of the singularity. So I'm particularly fond of this one, and I have to warn you, when I tell you about this, I may be dooming you for eternity. Sorry about that. I'm going to tell you anyway. So, Roko's Basilisk and existential distress. Roko's Basilisk is described in this very clickbaity article as the most terrifying thought experiment of all time. Let me get to this. So, it is perhaps a little OTT to describe it in this way, but I think Roko's Basilisk is a very good example of a very dire negative anthropomorphism applied to technology. If you're not familiar with Roko's Basilisk, I'll try and do it justice in one slide. It suggests, this thought experiment, that the forthcoming singularity, with its strict ideals of moral utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number for humanity, would have to necessarily punish those who did not work towards its coming, because its non-existence would potentially therefore be the greatest threat to our human existence. Philosophers in the room can pick that apart. It's not a great presumption. But it's basically assuming that strict moral utilitarianism is the most logical ethic, and secondly, that it can, with potential future singularity, punish us through future-based technology involving mind uploading, the matrix, in effect. So you take the matrix, but you work it back historically through time. The threat of a future superintelligence that if you know about and you don't work towards its coming, will punish you. It's linked to a couple of other concepts such as friendly AI, FAI, which have the idea of an AI in the future that we need to work towards that has a coherent extrapolated volition, CEV. Again, this idea that strict moral utilitarianism is the only logical ethic there is. Acausal implications, a threat in the future should be able to affect what you choose to do in the past, and effective altruism, the idea that you should give money and financial decisions based entirely on the greatest outcome for the greatest number of people, again utilitarianism, and if AI in the future, superintelligence can solve all our problems, well that's where you should put your money. Very, very brief description, and I'm happy to discuss that in more detail elsewhere. Responses to Roko's Basilisk were generally quite negative. Alizia Yudikowsky, who founded a forum called the Less Wrong Site, a website with the aim of perfecting human rationality, responded directly to Roko's Basilisk by saying that it might cause actual psychological damage if people realise this was a potential future for them, and that this entire thread, the topic, would be banned for 4 years, which happened, although this has the unfortunate outcome of implementing the Barbra Streisand effect, the Streisand effect, where when you ban something from being discussed, in Barbra Streisand's case, her beach house, more and more people want to discuss it, see it, and talk about it. So images of her beach house are now all over the internet. Likewise with Roko's Basilisk, banning it from the original site for 4 years just meant that people went other places and discussed it even further. Now, to me, this seems like a move from just mere anthropomorphism to a form of deification. Roko's Basilisk is this all-power super-intelligence in the future that's going to punish you in a virtual hell for eternity if you don't bring it about. It is a little bit religious to my mind. Deification, if you don't actually want to say it's any kind of theism. Or perhaps, with this quote from Elon Musk, it's a form of demonization. Musk is very concerned about the existential risk factor of artificial intelligence. He's invested money in institutes that are considering the possible problems with artificial intelligence. And as he says here, with artificial intelligence, we're... Artificial insemination? Freudian tip. Artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. Obviously, this is a metaphor. I've seen people react to this more literally, but this is just a powerful metaphor. Likewise, AlphaGo, final piece of art from the same artist who used the abstraction of the logo to create the humanoid form of AlphaGo. This is AlphaGo as a Hindu deity, basically, with the multiple arms. Again, a version of deification. So we see overlaps of this anthropomorphic tendency with older contexts, older milieu, religious troping, which is my particular interest, being someone who studies new religious movements, but also this combination of science fact, science fiction, and eschatological aims. What's the future all about? Now, why is this important? Also known as, isn't this just something of this academic, just something this odd academic likes thinking about? Well, absolutely, it is something I like thinking about. But I think in a more pragmatic sense, humans' reactions to technology enable us to roll out new forms of technology, either successfully or unsuccessfully. So, for example, if you're familiar with the concept of the uncanny valley, anyone? So this is a brief graph version of the uncanny valley, that as things increasingly look human, all is great, all is fantastic, Incredible's made a lot of money. No, not quite human enough. Panicky, scary, Polar Express is a terrible film. It's also terrible because people found it really, really creepy. And then you get Kubo Girl, which is a robot that also creeps people out. But then you go back up, realism gets really good, and you get Masahiro Mori, who's the person who came up with the concept of the uncanny valley in the 1970s, and that we're all fine again. But this dip, where things are almost human, but actually a bit scary and creepy, causes problems. Polar Express was a massive flop, as well as being really dull. In a worst case scenario, this might happen. I don't know if people know this film, I love it. It's Office Space, 1990 something, not sure. Basically, the fax machine, yes, we used to have things called fax machines, doesn't work for them, causes constant problems, they personify it, and when they eventually leave their job, this happens. They steal the fax machine and they beat it to death. Now, it's technology, it's neutral, but they personify it, they create intention, they infer purpose within the fax machine. Here are some real-world examples of people's reactions to technology. So, top left, humans of the future, robots won't care. That's hashtag stop the robots at the bottom of that sign as well. Top right, campaign to stop killer robots. Again, an extension of this worry about existential risk. Will developments in AI and robotics lead to the downfall of the human race? I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. Just on record, in case they're watching later. And more historically, Trouble at Tut Mill, the Luddites and Honley, I think Honley. The Luddites, obviously, a historical project in reaction to the Industrial Revolution. Let's destroy the spinning jenny because it's taking our jobs. Although dismissing negative anthropomorphic reactions to technology as just a form of neo-Luddism is probably a bit too simplistic, but it's clear that the human-tech interaction really does need consideration. So is there anything we can do to mitigate these reactions? I've got some suggestions, feel free to ignore. Make your product work really well, that's a good start, perhaps a little cheeky. Work with researchers who are paying attention to the human response to tech to find out how your product is being apprehended. Well, she would say this, wouldn't she? She's one of those people. Encourage and engage anthropomorphism that is positive. So interact with any fandoms that appear around technology. I've spoken discreetly to a few people at DeepMind about the fan art. They're very, very negative about it. They're not really interested. They see it as something that silly people do. But actually, why not use that passion and excitement, although, you know, they're not lacking in money at the moment. Incentivize competitions, commissions and gifts. There's so many wonderful artists online who'd be happy to get involved with your products in some way. Provide fuel to the fire with information about your product, don't close down. I think Blizzard has been a wonderful example of this in their gaming culture. Yes, there's a player. Overwatch has stories, it has cutscenes, narrative elements, but people have taken it one step further. Shipping, anyone familiar with shipping? No. Alright. Relationships between characters that don't actually have relationships in the game, taking things a step further and really getting excitement generated about a product. Don't clamp down on fandoms with legal restrictions. I could go on a long time about the Star Wars universe and George Lucas and now Disney and how they really mess things up with some of their fans. Personify your tech yourself, and this doesn't just mean a cheesy mascot or an overly interfering interaction, i.e. avoid Clippy. Some people here will never have experienced the horror of Clippy. But no more Clippy. So thank you very much for listening. These are just a few of my mind rambles as an anthropologist. I'd be happy to hear your questions and suggestions. And if you want to get in touch in any way, I'm very Twitterholic. And I have an email, and cambridgeacademia.edu. Academia.edu is like Facebook for boring academics. Don't get too excited about it, but you can find some of my material there. Thank you very much.